Well, hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for spending part of your Saturday morning with us. My name is Grant Mayfield. I am one of the leaders of Safe and Welcoming Roeland Park, which is really just a group of neighbors who got together and are working to enact policies that protect immigrants and documented immigrants, and by extension, the entire community. So we've been working for several months on that piece of things, but along the way we got in touch with a wonderful person, Catalina Velarde, who is an immigration attorney in Kansas City, and she's been kind of helping guide our work, answer some of the questions that we've had. And a few weeks ago, she offered us her Immigration 101 training, which is really a broad overview of the way the US immigration system works. And I think you'll find how it doesn't work as well. So we found that to be really helpful to our work and just interesting, important information to have. And we asked Catalina if she could offer that more publicly, and we're able to offer it to all of you. So I'm excited to have you all here. You had a myriad of reasons for wanting to attend today, but for whatever reason you came and are interested in this information, we're happy to have you. Catalina, I don't know if you want to give a little bit of a background on yourself and kind of what we'll be talking about today.
Sure thing. Thanks, Grant. Again, my name is Catalina Velarde. I am an attorney here in the Kansas City area. My primary focus is immigration and family law, just in essence, service to the Spanish-speaking community all around. I'm also an adjunct professor at UMKC Law School. I teach the Multicultural Lawyering and Spanish for Lawyers course. And I wear many hats in the community. I'm on a racial bias citizen advisory board for Roeland Park Police Department, and just in various advocacy groups. The purpose of this presentation today is really to help answer basic questions about the immigration process, as Grant said. It's not meant to be a deep dive. It's meant to be an opportunity for you to ask questions and figure out where there is misinformation and where you can better share information with your neighbors regarding the immigration system. So we'll go ahead and get started. For those of us in the Kansas City area, in the past few years, we've seen a couple of immigration stories in the news. Some of you may remember, I think it was about a year ago, the manager of the Blue Line Hockey Bar was detained by immigration and eventually deported. She is currently in Mexico. And this was surprising to many because she is married to a U.S. citizen and she has a U.S. citizen teenage daughter, but nonetheless, she was deported. We also had an incident about a year ago as well of ICE officers detaining a man who for deportation, and it ended up bringing scrutiny to the Kansas City area because of how the man was detained. He was in his vehicle, and ICE and local police broke the vehicle window and detained him. And then also about a year or two ago, we had the story of Professor Syed Jamal, who was detained as he was getting ready to take his kids to school. So a lot of stories here in the Kansas City area. And whenever these stories come up, inevitably the commentary that accompanies it is commentary along these lines of well, people who have been here for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, why have they not legalized their status? Like, are they just not trying? Are they just being lazy? Is it just a willful defiance of the immigration law system? And again, we're going to talk about why that is or that isn't the case. And the summary is basically being here for any period of time does not automatically mean that you're going to legalize your immigration status. So again, my goal today is to provide you with sufficient and accurate information so that you can better understand and participate in the public debate and dispel any inaccuracies where you find them. A little bit of terminology, and this is very particular to immigration practice, so don't feel like you have to memorize this, but when you talk about the different groupings of citizenship and immigrant status here in the immigration law system, you have, of course, people who are citizens, and we'll talk about that in a minute. We have people who are immigrants, and immigrant, again, is a very particular term. It means somebody who is intending to remain in the United States for an extended period of time to make their home here. And immigrants are most commonly referred to as lawful permanent residents or green card holders. You also have non-immigrants in the system. These are people who are in the United States for a limited time, for a limited purpose. There are there's a wide variety of non-immigrant statuses. So these are people who are in the US on, for example, a tourist visa or a student visa or some sort of employment visa, or that they're here to be professors or as athletes or as entertainers. It runs the gamut. And then you have people who are out of status or undocumented. Now, people who are out of status or undocumented, they could have been people who in prior history had an immigration status, and then that immigration status expired and perhaps they overstayed, or persons who are in the country that did not enter with a lawful status to begin with. All right, so that was sort of the hierarchy. The main question is, well, how do we get there? If we're wondering why the people in those stories before did not become US citizens with all the time that they had here, well, then how could they have done this? Well, there are basically three ways to become a US citizen. They are citizenship by birth, by derivation, and by naturalization. So citizenship by birth, that is either being born on US soil or being born to a US citizen, even if it was a birth abroad. A birth by derivation is when you are born abroad and your parent is a foreign national themselves, but then they become a US citizen and you, by operation of law, inherit that status. And then by naturalization, that is the process by where you test in. So as we can see here, these are the lists of representatives who were born in countries other than the United States. And you can see that the variety of manners in which they acquired their citizenship. So we have currently members of Congress that are born abroad, that are US citizens by either birth, even though they were born in France, like Representative Mark Meadows, or for example, citizenship by derivation, as in the case of Raul Ruiz from the state of California. So there's a wide variety. And we also, of course, know that we have some senators who are not born in the US, but are US citizens, like Ted Cruz, Tammy Duckworth, and even a couple of members of the current cabinet. So naturalization, again, is the testing process. So naturalization is when you file an application and appear at an interview with an officer from immigration. The USCIS is U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. You answer questions about your your presence in the United States, and you are vetted as far as your living history, work history, of course, criminal history, any travel abroad. And then you're also tested as far as your civics and English subject matter knowledge. If you pass that test, then you get to go to an oath ceremony where you're not a U.S. citizen until you take the oath. These ceremonies are usually great events. And then you finally become a U.S. citizen. All right, so that's the main goal. But before that, before you ever get to be a U.S. citizen, you have to be a permanent resident. So how do we become a permanent resident? Well, that's I think the bulk of what this presentation is going to entail. How do we immigrate to the United States? And there are three main ways to do that. That you can either do immigration through family basis, through an employment basis, or through some sort of humanitarian basis relief. So let's talk about family-based immigration, which sometimes can be called chain migration or family reunification immigration. These are the basic steps to family-based immigration. First, you have a petition that helps the immigration authorities determine whether you have a proper relationship for that family-based immigration. Then you have to be cognizant of your priority date, which just means when was your petition filed. That basically just puts puts you in the queue. Then your petition gets sent to the National Visa Center, which reviews whether your sponsor, your petitioner, has the financial support to provide for you in the United States. And then depending on whether you are in the United States or not, then the final step is either a field office review or a consular review that vets you for whether you should be allowed into the United States, or whether you are inadmissible, meaning have you done something, or is there some sort of ground by which we can exclude you. So step one, the family petition. Again, every step of this is a vetting process. For a family petition, the questions that we're trying to answer is, what's the relationship between the person who is sponsoring you and the intending immigrant? When was that filed? What is the intending immigrant's nationality? Is the intending immigrant already in the United States, or are they still abroad? And again, are they inadmissible for any reason? Have they done anything that for which we need to exclude them? So we're going to start with the first question: what is the relationship? So people who are both U.S. citizens and permanent residents can file a family-based immigration petition for a family member. So you have your petitioner, that's the U.S. citizen or permanent resident. You have the beneficiary, who is the intending immigrant, and the relationship between the parties either has to be one of a spouse, a child, a parent, or a sibling. U.S. citizens can petition for their spouses, for their children, for their parents, and for their siblings. Permanent residents or green card holders can only petition for their spouses or for their unmarried children. So there's no such thing as somebody petitioning for their aunt, uncle, cousin, grandma, grandpa, uncle twice removed. That is not a possibility, no matter how much you love them, no matter how close you are to them. It's only these relationships that are allowed to petition for each other. And when I describe this process, I talk about it a lot as if they were lanes in a supermarket, because depending on the relationship between the parties, everybody has to go through a different lane. So we're going to review the lanes with, our Simpsons family. So the first lane is actually the express lane. This is a U.S. citizen petitioning for either their spouse, their children who are unmarried and under 21, or their parents. So in this situation, we have here Homer, who is our U.S. citizen, and he can petition for his spouse, Marge, for his children who have to be both unmarried and under 21. So here we made Maggie the only child who is unmarried and under 21. And of course, Homer can also petition for his parents. So being in the express lane means that there are no numerical limitations as far as how many people can be processed in this lane each year, and also no wait time limitations other than however long it takes for USCIS to process your paperwork. But then we have actually six more lanes, or 5 more lanes. We have lane number 1, which is a U.S. citizen petitioning for a child who is still unmarried, but who is now over 21. We decided that the age of 21 somehow makes you, a minor versus not in immigration system. So here in the lane F1, we have Homer being able to petition for Bart, who is 25, but he's unmarried. Now, if you have a U.S. citizen petitioning for a child who's married, regardless of their age, that is a separate supermarket lane. That is lane 3. So here, Homer petitioning for Lisa. Then you have lane 4, which is a U.S. citizen petitioning for their sibling. Now, for siblings, it doesn't matter the age, or it doesn't matter the marital status of the sibling that's being petitioned. Now, you'll notice I went 1, 3, 4. So what about lane 2? So lane 2 is actually split, and lane 2 is the lane for permanent residents who are petitioning for a family member. So lane 2A is a permanent resident who's petitioning for a child, for their spouse, or for their child who is unmarried and under 21. So in the graphic here, Jackie is our permanent resident, and she's petitioning for her spouse Clancy, and she can petition also for her daughter who is unmarried and under 21, which in this graphic we just made Patty be under 21 and unmarried. And then we have lane 2, actually it should be lane 2B, which is a permanent resident petitioning for their child who is over 21 but still unmarried. So in this example, we would have Jackie petitioning for Selma, who is 25 and unmarried. And as part of this petition, Selma's daughter Ling is a derivative. So Jackie only petitions for Selma, but as a derivative, Ling is able to gain immigration status that way. So the only one that gets left out in this scenario from Jackie's family would be Marge, who is married. So that's how, those are the supermarket lanes. So the next question in our trip is, when was the petition filed, and what is the intending immigrant's nationality? And that's going to tell us 2 very important things. It's going to tell us our wait time to be processed, and yeah, actually that is it, the wait time, both of them. All right, so here is what you get when immigration processes your petition. You get one of these receipts, and if after your petition is evaluated, you get if you are so approved, you get an approval notice. And the approval notice will have this funny little thing here, little box here that says priority date. That is the your official place in line as far as immigration is concerned. And that is going to determine when you can actually become a permanent resident, a green card holder. And the reason we split those lanes is because we actually have numerical limitations on each category, like I said, except for the express lane. So these are the limitations. You don't need to memorize them, but for people in the F1 shopping lane, only 23,400 can enter each year. Permanent residents get 114,000 visas split between the 2 of them. And these are the numbers for the 3rd and 4th categories. So your priority date, you have to take your priority date and you have to compare it to something called the visa bulletin. The visa bulletin tells you how far your line is advancing. So I think the example that I have of the priority date is something from 2011. So for somebody born, if this person were in the F1 shopping lane, if they're from China, this line is already at 2014, so that means that that person from 2011 could have processed their paperwork and become a permanent resident now, and so forth and so on with the grid of categories. Now you'll notice that these categories have a lot of different dates to them, and that we split off certain countries: China, India, Mexico, and the Philippines. And the reason that we do that is for the following. We decided sometime that not any single country was going to take more than a certain percentage of the visas. So that means, so if you compare, if I'm petitioning for an older unmarried child, if my child is a citizen of France, right now USCIS is processing the people petitioned in 2014, but if your family members from Mexico, then USCIS is currently processing the people who were petitioned for in 1997. So as I said, that's based on the fact that we don't want any one country to take any more than a certain share of the visas. So that's what the line was like back in April of 2020, so at the beginning of this month. And 10 years ago, or actually last year, see how much between last April and this April, see how much the line jumped. So this line from 2011 moved up to 2014, but the line from Mexico went from August of 97 only to September of 97. So in 1 year, the people from France, if just to pick a random country, their line advanced 3 years worth, if you want to consider it that way, whereas the line for people from Mexico only advanced 1 month's worth in 1 whole year. And even if we go back 10 years, Same thing if you look at the Mexico line. In 10 years, they've only advanced 5 years worth of petitions. And if we go back even further, you can just see that the lag is exponential for certain countries. So this is what it amounts to. So currently in April so from April of 2000 to now April of 2020, in 20 years, the line for all other countries except those other split ones have advanced about 15 years worth of petitions. So they're lagged, but not as lagged. Whereas a line for people from Mexico has advanced less than 4 years. So in 20 years, your date has only scooted up for 4 years worth of petitions. And like I said, this is basically because we don't want to have any one country take the bulk of the petitions. But it becomes a challenge for countries that are oversubscribed, countries like China and India who have over 1 billion people each, and countries that are our neighbors like Mexico who will naturally have more immigration from those regions. So as you can see, there are a lot of petitions pending. This is a big bucket of people. So for those numbers that I mentioned, like a U.S. citizen petitioning for their older child, and only 23,000 of them can come each year. Well, you've got 235,000 of them pending. And you can see these other categories as well. So these are the backlogs in millions of people. And these are the backlogs by country. So you can see that Mexico's backlog is significantly larger than the others.
Hey, Catalina, I've told people to either jump in with questions or to put them in the chat, and we did get one.
Sure.
It's down there. I don't know if you can keep track of those while you're talking.
Let me, if you can share the question. Okay, so does the lag for Mexico come from the volume? Yes. So you can see here the volume of people. This is probably, yeah, like this chart and this pie chart will be, so for all of the family categories, all of the supermarket lanes together, if you bunch them up together, this is Mexico's got like a third of the pie here, again, just because of the proximity. So it's only natural. So these are a lot of numbers that I don't want to bore you with, but again, we see that there's just a huge number of people waiting. So if we take those numbers and we look at how many can come each year, as I showed you previously, even if we just straight line it without regarding splitting off that limitation per country, this is how much the wait time would be for each category. So for a U.S. citizen petitioning for their older child, if we just took our number and divided it by how many people in that pile, that they would have a 10-year wait. A U.S. citizen petitioning for their married kid, those people would have a 27-year wait. A U.S. citizen petitioning for their sibling, those people would have a 33-year wait. And permanent residents petitioning for their spouse or little kids, 2 years. And permanent residents petitioning for their older unmarried kids, almost 11 years. So this is if we just straight lined the wait periods divided by the number of people that we can allow each year. But if we look at these oversubscribed countries, again, I said no more than 7% can go to them. This is kind of what the wait becomes for them. So somebody who is petitioning for a U.S. citizen, somebody who's already a U.S. citizen, but who is petitioning for their older unmarried child, and it just so happens that that child is from Mexico, this is how much the wait would be. Years, so 124 years, 158 years. So unless we have some radical medical advances, these are highly improbable categories. Okay, I see another question here. Are the people with pending petitions allowed to remain in the U.S.? Excellent question. That's the next topic. Is the person already in the U.S. and were they inspected or admitted? So when there was the last major change in immigration law in 1996, they decided to make a lot of differences in the law depending on not so much whether you were already in the country or not, but whether you were inspected or admitted, meaning did you come here with lawful immigration status or not. So, and that determines whether you can, even if you have somebody who can petition for you, are you going to be able to complete your process in the United States or not? So if you're in the express lane and entered lawfully, you can complete your process here in the United States. You are allowed to remain in the United States. But if you're in any other one of the shopping lanes and your status has expired, even if you came here on a tourist visa, I mean, tourist visas don't last however long we need them to last. Let me see, get back there. So your tourist visa is not going to last 10 years. So if your status has expired, then you're going to have to complete your process abroad. You're going to have to leave the country. And this is the consulate in Juarez, Mexico, where I'm from. So the next question, once you leave the country, this triggers a lot of a whole new set of complications in the immigration system. So are you in the country or not? Do you have to leave? And then what happens when you do? Well, again, in the last major changes to immigration law, one of the things that was added was a punishment that accrues for the time that you are here in the United States undocumented or out of status. If you've been here undocumented and the clock starts as soon as your status expires. So if I came here on a tourist visa that expires that expired on December 31st of last year, if I'm here the 180 days beyond that date, luckily I don't have an official punishment. But if I'm here until July, now I'm past the 6-month mark, now whenever I leave the country, I'm going to have a punishment that says I can't come back for 3 whole years. And if I've been here out of status for more than 1 year, I've got another punishment that says I can't come back for 10. And what if I've been here for 1 year, happen to leave and happen to come back? Now I've got something called the permanent bar, which means not only can I not come back for 10 years, but I can't even ask for any sort of forgiveness to come back any sooner than that. And if I do have the ability to request waiver of these punishments, and the only ones that I can ask forgiveness for is this first 3-year punishment and this 10-year punishment, even to ask for forgiveness for that, from that punishment, I have to file something called a waiver of inadmissibility, and I have to show extreme hardship to the U.S. citizen or permanent relative that I'm leaving behind here. And that relative can only be my parent or my spouse. So what does this mean? This becomes very difficult. For example, when you have a family member, well, let's say that you have a couple who came here on tourist visas and overstayed. So they are both out of status. Neither one has lawful immigration status right now. If they have a child here, that child's a U.S. citizen, and eventually that child can petition for their parent. Well, if the parent is, for whatever reason, inadmissible, actually, let's say both of the parents actually came undocumented. Both of the parents came undocumented. They came here, they had a kid, and now the kid is old enough where they can petition for their parent. Well, that parent's going to have to leave the country, and as soon as they leave the country, they're going to trigger that punishment, because they've obviously been here longer than a year, because they have a 21-year-old now. And when they leave the country, they're going to trigger that 10-year punishment, and they can only come back if they can establish extreme hardship to a U.S. citizen parent or spouse. So if they're married to somebody else who's not documented, there's no forgiveness of that 10-year punishment. So it doesn't really do you any sort of lawful purpose to have a U.S. citizen child if you can't qualify for one of these waivers. So, and as far as other grounds that can keep you excluded from correcting your immigration status, I'm not going to go through them, but this is basically what we got. So there's criminal grounds, obviously controlled substance grounds. you've been a money launderer, if you're a terrorist, it's probably good. All of that. If you have participated in any sort of persecution or genocide, if you have been here without admission, so if you came here undocumented, if you have ever falsely claimed citizenship, if you came here without a visa or don't have a current visa, if you've been removed before, and all sorts of other grounds. So as you can see, there's a lot of reasons to keep you out. One of the more popular reasons in the news lately has been the public charge ground, which is already a reason to exclude you, but the burden on that ground has just been extremely heightened as of late. So that's in some of the complications that can arise just from even trying to have a petition through a family member. So again, that you have the requisite family member, you have a child here who's a U.S. citizen, you have a spouse here who's a U.S. citizen, or a sibling who's a U.S. citizen, and even then, these are the complications that can come about. Now, for employment type petitions, the same sort of inadmissibility and punishments apply, but that's a whole other story. So, and it's obviously less common than family immigration and also humanitarian immigration. So let's talk about that one. The main form of humanitarian-based immigration is asylum. Now, asylum means that you are fleeing persecution and that you have no other way to survive but to make it and ask for relief from the U.S. government. In my work, I mainly deal with persons who are seeking asylum from the Central American countries of Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. So there's a little chart right there that compares the population and square mileage area of our area, Kansas City, and the state of Kansas and Missouri as a whole, and the homicide rate for each area. Kansas City homicide rate, last time I checked, and I haven't updated in a couple of years, but 7.7 homicides per 100,000 residents. Now for El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, those are the rates. So these are quite dangerous. So, okay, I see another question. Seeking an asylum, are they required to seek asylum in Mexico first? That was one of the recent developments in asylum law, the safe third country rule. So that's something that is has been tried to be implemented by saying, you know, if you're from Guatemala and you cross through Mexico to get to the U.S., you have to have tried to get asylum in Mexico first before you can request asylum in the U.S. So that's something that's currently attempting to be implemented, but to my knowledge, not quite fully enforced yet. All right. And these are some photos of asylum seekers and sort of what life is like in Central America. So folks decide to make the journey on train or by rafts and do whatever they need to seek some semblance of safety. Oftentimes, or most of the people that I work with, they effectively approach officers at the border and tell them that they're seeking asylum, and the officers duly process them, and then we get to detention. And I know that's also been in the news as of late, is the different detention centers at the border. Now these are some images from there. And again, this is a lot of the work that I do. So I wanted to showcase this video to show you a little bit of at least one story of somebody who has gone through this process and why they did so.
Lilian Oliva Bardales is a 19-year-old woman who was recently deported back to Honduras after attempting to cross the border and enter the United States illegally with her son, Christian, who was 3 years old at the time. She was held in a detention facility in Texas, where they spent 8 months.
pues me fui porque el papá me ha quitado el niño en 2 ocasiones, me lo ha quitado y el niño pues aquí anda su cirugía, su quebradura, donde pasó todo eso con su papá, ¿verdad? Entonces yo, la verdad, por eso ya ahora que le pasó eso al niño, volví a decidir irme para que me guardaran protección allá en Estados Unidos, pues, pedir ayuda. No, que no vas a tener ni un novio, que no te vas a hacer de otro hombre, porque te mato. Yo soy capaz de matarte, me decía, más que todo yo lo conozco a él como es. Entonces, desde el momento que él estaba en México, yo logré llevarme a mi hijo para allá, que fue ahorita. Dije, yo es la única opción, ahorita que él está ahí, yo me voy y me llevo a mi hijo. Y si, gracias a Dios, la patrulla fronteriza, el gobierno de Estados Unidos me da la oportunidad, me ayuda pues por todo lo que yo le explique, yo llevo toda la razón, dije yo.
However, she was not able to enter the United States, and she and Christian were taken to a detention center in Texas, where she attempted to apply for asylum for her and her son on the grounds of domestic violence. Time after time, she saw her efforts thwarted, leaving her in a state of desperation.
Un día fue el 3 de junio, llegué al momento de quererme quitar la vida, ¿verdad? Porque yo más que todo sabía, ¿va?, que si a mí me deportaban para acá a este país, igual yo no iba a tener el apoyo de nadie, en verdad, ni que nadie me apoyara. Entonces me corté aquí. Me decían que yo estaba loca. Entonces yo les decía a ellos, ¿verdad? Yo no estoy loca, yo estoy reclamando mis derechos, decía. Porque me decían, usted no va a ver su hijo, porque la verdad, si a usted le damos su hijo, usted es capaz hasta saber de qué hacerle a su hijo. Me quitaron el niño, a mí me apartaron, me pusieron como un vestido, bien como chaleco antibala, de aquí, ¿verdad? Bien duro, aquello. Me quitaron mi cartel, me quitaron mis calcetas, todo me dejaron así, en un piso helado. En la cama era bien dura, casi como este palo donde yo dormía. Cuando me dijeron, quítese la ropa para ponerme eso como castigo, que les cuento, me dijeron, si usted no se quita esa ropa, vamos a ver quién manda, si usted o nosotros. Se la vamos a desgarrar, se la vamos a agarrar y se la vamos a romper, me dijeron. Entonces vine yo, pues ya me tenía con miedo o eso, pues tuve que quitármela. Yo lloraba, yo no comía, mi vida era muy triste ahí en ese lugar. Me sentía nada en ese país directamente. Y no me brindaron el apoyo, y era cuando más me hubieran brindado el apoyo.
The detention center was full of other families, mostly single mothers with their children. They also fell to the grasp of desperation.
Y los niños también decían, nosotros, ¿para qué queremos vida? No somos criminales. Yo soy capaz, decían los niños, yo me voy a ahorcar, yo me voy a matar. Inmigración decía que eran mentiras eso. Mami, ya salimos de la cárcel, que él le llamó cárcel a ese lugar, pues.
Despite the bleak outlook for her immediate future, Lillian hopes she can have a chance to start her life over with her son, away from the threat of her husband.
All right, so that is one asylum story, and it's not an uncommon asylum story of the types of cases that I see. Now, asylum is, again, as I was saying, is persecution, and this is basically what you have to show in order to be eligible for asylum. You have to show either past persecution or some sort of fear of future persecution, and not all persecution is sufficient for eligibility for asylum. The persecution actually has to be, first of all, severe enough, and it has to be based on some sort of protected ground, some sort of asylum basis ground. And the only types of persecution that count for asylum are if you're persecuted on account of your race or your religion or your nationality or your political opinion, or some, sort of this catch-all category that we have, that is membership in a particular social group. And membership in a particular social group just basically means something, well, all of these grounds, the basis for them is it's something that you can't change, like your race, or something that you should not be made to change, like your religion. So other sort of categorizations that have been considered asylum grounds before, are things like family, your gender, LGBT orientation, or something like a past experience. You can't unring the bell. So if there's some sort of common past experience that has made you a target for this persecution, then that's you can at least try to argue that you're eligible for asylum on that ground. Next, you also have to show that the persecution is by the government or somebody that the government is unable or unwilling to control. So you have to show that it's the government chasing you, or that you've tried to seek aid from your home government and were denied, or that you didn't even seek aid because you knew it would be fruitless. And finally, you also have to show that that you are unable to relocate within your country. You have to show that that no matter where in your country that you could relocate, the persecution would persist. And this is maybe a little bit easier for folks from smaller countries like El Salvador. Quite difficult for somebody who is from Mexico to show that they cannot relocate anywhere in the entire country, or somebody from a large country like Brazil. So if you have any questions, please let me know. I see a couple of questions here. One of them is from the family law immigration, so I'm going to address that real quick. So if a mother who is naturalized applies for her son, and by the time the son is approved, he grows up and gets married and has children, what can he do? So that depends a lot on the timing. And but if, for example, he's already grown up and for some reason his immigration status is not legalized, or he doesn't have a lawful immigration status by that time, this is a bit particular in that, let me see, let's go back to the supermarket lanes real quick. Okay, so as far as our lanes, so people who are in lanes 1, 2, 3, 4, kind of like we had an example number 2B, people in these categories, they can have derivatives. So if they have had a new spouse or child, that person can be brought up through the initial family law petition, but not so in the express lane. So in the express lane, you get the benefit of the fact that there's no numerical limitation, but you can't have a derivative through that petition. So for example, in this case, Homer, if he wants to petition for Marge, Maggie doesn't automatically come up through that petition. Homer has to file a separate petition for Marge and a separate petition for Maggie. All right, and another question. Are there organizations that can help people seek asylum? There are organizations that work locally and that are on a national scale. There's obviously a lot of organizations at the border that I'm familiar with that help people seek asylum. We could probably have another whole session on the complications that have been created for border asylum seekers, sort of like the migrant protection protocols, the Remain in Mexico program that makes people stay in Mexico and basically take a ticket at the counter and wait their turn in line. I've just heard horror stories of people being attacked while they're waiting in Mexico or what have you, and it's also incredibly challenging for people to get proper legal representation at the when the attorney is in the U.S. and the person might be in some sort of temporary housing or no housing at all, or sort of tent camp abroad. So, and does Mexico have organizations to help deal with domestic abuse? They do, as do the other Central American countries, but are they good enough and strong enough and well-funded enough to assist? That's what you have to argue as far as making somebody eligible for asylum. And in immigration law, there's something really particular that happens. So immigration courts are not normal courts. They're administrative courts. So they are part of the executive branch, and they are actually part of the Department of Justice, so which is headed up by the Attorney General. So the Attorney General, who heads the Department of Justice, there's a division within DOJ called EOIR, that is the Executive Office for Immigration Review. So this is the immigration court system. So the Attorney General is the boss of the immigration court system and the immigration judges. When somebody has their case in immigration court, if their result is not favorable there, that case can be appealed to another administrative agency called the Board of Immigration Appeals, the BIA. And the BIA is sort of what sets our law in immigration court. From there, you can appeal to federal court, but it's time consuming and expensive, and not a lot of that happens unless you have a really, really good case and probably the money or pro bono counsel to proceed with it. But the Attorney General, what he can do, so if somebody has a case in court and then it goes to the Board of Immigration Appeals, what the Attorney General can do, he is basically a one-man Supreme Court. He can take any decision from the Board of Immigration Appeals and sort of re-decide it. So that has happened a lot in these last few years, where what we thought we had as precedent in immigration court has been just flipped on its head. And particular for victims of domestic violence, that's been one of the major changes. That what was a life-changing precedential case for a lot of people that confirmed that being a victim of domestic violence is severe enough to warrant asylum, that has been dismantled. And so we're going to turn our focus a little bit from asylum and talk a little bit about what happens when somebody is here in the U.S. and as far as internal immigration enforcement. So the process of deportation. So the process of deportation, this is mainly in the context of somebody who has been here for a number of years, for some reason does not have lawful status, as we've explained. Maybe they just don't have the family relationship to be able to have somebody petition for them, or maybe they have one of these punishments that they're not going to be able to have a waiver for. But for any reason, for whatever reason that somebody might fall into immigration's attention and immigration custody here, obviously the Department of Homeland Security, Immigration and Customs Enforcement will begin a deportation process. Now, the deportation process, we'll skip a few slides, begins with this document called the Notice to Appear. So this is like a legal, it's like a charging document. It's like the legal complaint. So this document states the grounds that you're being deported on, the legal grounds that you're being deported on, and what you're being accused of. So you are being accused of not being a citizen of the United States and instead being a citizen of Mexico, having entered the United States on such date at such place, and not having lawful immigration status to do so. So that's the document that begins your process in immigration court. And this is what an immigration court looks like. Here in Kansas City, we have an immigration court that has 3 courtrooms, currently 1 judicial vacancy. But when you present in court, this is basically where you have to argue your case. And sorry. And before you are in immigration court, if you have been picked up by ICE, you can be transported to any number of detention centers here in the area. Here around the Kansas City area, we use a handful of locations. And we actually have people detained for ICE in Platte County. We have people detained in Kingston, Missouri at the Caldwell County Detention Center. We have people detained in Topeka at the Shawnee County Adult Detention Center. We have people detained over here by Emporia at Chase County Detention in Cottonwood Falls, Kansas. And we have people all the way about 2.5 hours away in Morgan County Detention in Versailles, Missouri. So these detention centers, as you notice, I said county detention centers. So they're not actually ICE-owned detention centers. These are actual county jails. So the people who are detained for ICE are in with the general population. These are men and women are detained in these centers, and the ICE and the Department of Homeland Security actually rents the bed space from these county jails. And we do have a question as far as why are these so far from the urban core? Well, I mean, you can, the cynic in me will say, well, because that's a little bit purposeful to prevent people from having proper access to counsel, which is common. So these centers, again, ICE rents the bed space. So when somebody's detained here, you don't know where they're going to be until they get taken to whatever location. So when somebody's detained at these centers, each jail has their own process as far as visiting hours, as far as communication with detainees. So you have to know what the game is at one of these locations. For example, if I have somebody detained over in Versailles, they're actually quite amicable. And if I need to get somebody on the phone, they're understanding of the fact that I'm 2.5-hour drive away. So they will put the detainee on the phone for me and we can have an attorney-client privileged phone call if I call into that detention center. Whereas there's other detention centers that are closer that do not allow that. You know, some might say, no, you can leave a message and the detainee has to call you back, which the burden there is, does the detainee have the phone credits, the money to call you back? And there's other detention centers that say, no, you can't. We're not going to put that person on the phone. We're not going to leave them a message. If you want to come talk to them, you have to come all the way here. So those are some of the challenges that come from detention. Yep, and I had them here. The right to counsel is a challenge, the fact that somebody is far away. And then in that process, while they're being booked from their detention and through the ICE process, obviously there's a lot of intimidation and pressure that is input on the person who are detained, that you're not going to get anywhere, you're just going to end up deported anyway, why don't you just sign your deportation, and language barriers. We are seeing an increase locally in people who are actually not even fluent Spanish speakers, but who speak Central American and indigenous languages. So that's an added complication. Let me see. So, okay. So typically what happens if somebody is detained here, after they're detained, if they have already been deported before, whether it's been a border deportation or whether they've already had a judicial deportation here in the United States, then that deportation can be reapplied through expedited removal, which means do not pass go, do not collect $200 straight, basically get on the plane in a couple days. For people at the border, and these are, again, these depends a lot on where you are. Even if you get detained in the interior of the United States, but you express that you have a fear of returning to your country and that you're going to be persecuted, you can have a credible fear interview, which is the precursor interview to be able to request asylum. So that's the first step to verify that there is some story behind your claim, and then you would have an opportunity to make your argument with a judge. You can also be released under bond or be released under an ankle monitor. And then after you're released, you go through the actual process of trying to defend yourself from a deportation. And the defenses from your deportation, there are actually not very many ways to defend yourself from a deportation. One of the primary ways to do that is through something called cancellation of removal or cancellation of deportation. To be able to stake a claim on that, you have to show that you've been here for 10 years. You have to show that you are of good moral character. and you have to show that your deportation would cause exceptional and extremely unusual hardship on a U.S. citizen or permanent resident family member. And for those, the only family members that count are your spouse, your unmarried children, minor children, and your parents. So if all you have is a U.S. citizen sibling or a child who is already older and married, even if you've been here 10 years and have great moral character, you wouldn't have a basis for even soliciting this type of defense from your deportation. You also can request voluntary departure. That is a small period of time that the judge can grant you to close out your affairs, and then you depart on your own accord back to your home country. If you do not depart by the stated time, then that automatically becomes a deportation order, and ICE can come and detain you and summarily deport you. You can also try to defend yourself from a deportation through some other sort of immigration relief. There are forms of immigration status that the judge can't decide that are, because they're the purview of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, but you would be granted lawful status, and the judge sometimes will say, well, he's already applying for this other thing, let's see how this one plays out. And if the person gains lawful status through that other method, then there wouldn't be a reason to deport them because they are here lawfully now. And then, of course, you can request asylum, as we have stated before. Now, any questions or any other thoughts? Okay, well, I've been speaking for about an hour. So there are, as you can see, there are just entirely, this is an entirely very complicated system. There are a lot of other things that we can talk about. We can talk a lot more about the deportation process. We can talk a lot more about how people are detained and what immigration enforcement is like here in the United States. One of the things that I do want to mention as far as immigration enforcement, and it's pertinent to the purpose of this group, is that a lot of people get confused in the authority between immigration enforcement and actual police enforcement. They are very much not the same thing. ICE is, again, a civil agency, but a lot of what they do is to try to exert what would be police-like powers. And actually, the ACLU has actually just recently filed a lawsuit to try to keep them from doing so. One of the ways in which ICE can sometimes muddy the waters is through the way that they try to execute their warrants. So again, as a civil agency, ICE uses these things called administrative warrants. And administrative warrants are very different from a judicial warrant. So when somebody has committed a crime and the police need to make an arrest, what needs to happen is that a judge needs to be shown why the police believe that they have probable cause to detain a certain person or to seek certain evidence, and that judge needs to make a decision on the evidence that has been, the evidence of probable cause that has been presented to them, and then they get to decide whether there is a justifiable arrest warrant or search warrant. So not so with ICE. As an administrative agency, ICE basically just prints out this sheet. They don't have to show it to a judge. They don't have to show anybody any evidence. They don't have to prove that the person's undocumented or anything of the sort. This is just a form that they print out, but it's presented to people as a warrant, and a civil warrant and an actual judicial warrant are very, very different worlds. So this is a lot of the confusion and a lot of the clarification that this Roeland Park group is seeking to try to bring more transparency to. So, right. As far as how to best advocate for people who are in this situation, well, the fact that you are here and willing to listen to these types of conversations is certainly a great first step. The next great step is if you feel that there's information that people are missing out on, and could benefit from hearing, there you can always reach out to me, to this group, and we can find you the resources to help educate your constituency, your group. I actually do often a lot of like know your rights presentations to help persons who are members of this community learn how to assert their constitutional rights. So that's something that can be done. And other than that, it's just be aware and ask questions when you have them. So I think we can go ahead and end the presentation there, since we're about an hour in. If you have any further questions, please let us know, and I'll turn it back over to Grant and Stephanie.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Stephanie wants to add anything, but there are a few ways that you can continue to learn about this information and get involved in Roeland Park. The first is sign our petition. Learn more about it, sign it, share it with anybody that you think would be interested. You can also reach out to us, like Catalina mentioned, if you have questions or if you have other ways that you want to get involved. We'd love to have you, love to keep you more involved in this information and this work. To do so, you can go to our website, which Stephanie, do you want to type it in the chat and I'll just tell everybody? It is swroelandpark.org. The SW is safe and welcoming, but it's swroelandpark.org. Thank you again for coming today. Thank you to Catalina. We really appreciate her putting this presentation together and sharing it with us initially and then with you all more publicly. Stephanie, do you have anything to add, or should we just adjourn there?
I just, if we have a moment, I think I just want to make sure, are there any more questions before we adjourn that maybe Catalina or maybe Grant and I could answer? It looks like I don't see any more questions, but we will send you a copy of the presentation and some more resources about different organizations that are doing work to help immigrants and undocumented people in our communities. And there's actually a meeting on Monday, which I think, Kevin, you might be interested in. And I can put that in the meeting notes or the follow-up email as well. There's a group called AIR, and they do a network meeting once a month for people who are interested in these issues, and they try to inform people about what's going on and give different action opportunities. So we can put that information about that group in as well, and about what we're trying to do in Roeland Park. So thank you everyone for coming, and thanks Catalina so much for your presentation. It was very informative, and there's so much to learn about this issue.
There absolutely is. Obviously, like an hour is not enough to talk about everything. There's a lot of ground that we could have covered that I left out due to time, such as the current status of DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Program, also known as the Dreamers, and also what happens when somebody is a victim of violent crime here in the United States. So again, asylum is when something terrible happened to you in your home country, and what happens when you are a non-citizen and you are the victim of something terrible here in the United States. So there's a lot more that we can discuss. If you need more information, if you want another presentation on additional issues, please let us know. I am so glad that people are wanting to seek more information on this. And thank you for being here.
Thanks everyone. Have a good weekend.